the Bleacher Report app. You're with your host, Justin Henry. My co-host, Bob Parmar, is going to be out for the day. We're heading into week 6, and that means week 5 has already happened. So we got to talk about waiver wire pickups. But first, we had some breaking news happen in the NFL world today that's going to affect our fantasy teams. For those hanging out on the YouTube or on the Bleacher Report app, make sure to join us in the chat. But we did have some breaking news. Joe Flacco traded to the Cincinnati Bengals from the Cleveland Browns in exchange for a 5th-round pick swap. And obviously with Joe Flacco, a 6th-round pick went in. This is one of those trades that makes you go, because we already had Jake Browning, who wasn't playing very well, but it just started to look like he was getting Jamar Chase involved. Looked like he might have made some viable options for our Bengals players. And now they went and got Joe Flacco, who just got benched for the Cleveland Browns and was struggling to keep afloat some of the guys that we were relying on in fantasy. Jerry Jeudy was struggling. Joe Flacco himself only threw 2 touchdowns on the season. It looked like it wasn't a good thing for Joe Flacco, and now he goes behind the Cincinnati Bengals offensive line. I do like Joe Flacco in this situation, given that Joe Burrow is going to be out at least for another 2.5 months and could potentially come back at the end of the season. But Joe Flacco will need to be much better than his first 4 games in order to even make Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Chase Brown viable in this offense. The good news here is that this is a high-tempo offense, more so than the run-heavy offense that the Browns are trying to run. And this gives a little bit of upside for Joe Flacco. As a fantasy quarterback, I'm not really interested in Joe Flacco at all. But given the fact that he's going to be paired with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and I know, Chase Brown, this offense does kind of move well. I think Joe Flacco has some promise. So this isn't the type of quarterback I'd rush to pick up in single QB leagues. In your super flex leagues, I absolutely am trying to make a play on Joe Flacco to at least get him on your bench if you need a quarterback. If something's happened, you have Lamar Jackson, or maybe you had Joe Burrow earlier in the year, or you were relying on Jake Browning just a week ago. It wasn't the trade we all wanted. A lot of people wanted Kirk Cousins or maybe Jameis Winston or Russell Wilson to come in. But I think Joe Flacco can be a serviceable option here for the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, the bigger question, and I know it's what most of you are thinking, especially you guys in the chat, what does this do for Jamar Chase's value, right? Now, we just saw Jamar Chase have the game that we wanted him to have last week, right? 2 touchdowns. Looks like it was a bounce back, even though a lot of it was in the second half. He still maintains his wide receiver 1 value. Jamar Chase is the kind of player, it doesn't matter what kind of quarterback he has, he's going to be effective. Now, Joe Flacco has a history of force-feeding his number 1 receiver. We didn't see it as much this year, but we've seen Amari Cooper in the past. We've seen Jerry Jeudy have success. We saw Michael Pittman have success. Like, this is the kind of quarterback that can lead and take a wide receiver and make them elite. So Jamar Chase, I do think, people who took him number 1 overall are probably scratching their head thinking, like, what did I do? I probably should have took somebody else. But I do think even with Flacco, he will still maintain a wide receiver 1 value. I saw some crazy trades happening last week where he was going into wide receiver 2 range, getting traded for just backup options, and that was insane, right? We saw why Jamar Chase is here. So I think for me, Joe Flacco makes Jamar Chase serviceable as a boom or bust wide receiver 1. We're going to see the same big games that we saw from Jamar Chase, the 150, 2 touchdowns. That's just who he is. But I do think we see a little bit more of the lows because it's almost impossible for him to carry Jamar Chase's value and T. Higgins' value. And I'm starting to think that's the player that will benefit the most from this is T. Higgins. Now, when we look at Joe Flacco and what he's done this season, who is he really targeting? He's targeted the bigger body guys, right? We haven't seen Jerry Jeudy pop the way we thought, but we did see Cedric Tillman before he went on IR. He was playing okay. We saw Harold Fannin. We saw David Njoku. The bigger body players do well, and that's the one player who struggled, especially since Joe Burrow's been out, but even before then, it's been T. Higgins, and he's been a hard player to roster even in fantasy. And we know he had the touchdown last week, but it was accompanied by 3 catches and 22 yards. Like, that doesn't help us when we're looking for elite wide receiver 2 numbers where we drafted him. So I think Joe Flacco does bring a little bit of floor for T. Higgins because he'll spread the ball out, right? Like, T. Higgins isn't this big play guy. He will catch touchdowns, but he needs volume. The problem with T. Higgins is we haven't been seeing the volume. So My gut says that they're going to say, hey, Joe Flacco, not Burrow, Joe Flacco, you go air this thing out. But T. Higgins now becomes a little bit safer wide receiver 3. I still think he's boomer bust, a little touchdown dependent, but I do think he is a boomer bust wide receiver 3 and a little bit more startable than he has been in weeks past. So the other player here that a lot of people are having trouble with, I would say, in fantasy circles is Chase Brown. What are you doing with Chase Brown? Like, he was drafted as a back-end second-round pick. Some people took him mid-second round. But we haven't seen anything that resembles the Chase Brown of last year. The good news I will say with Joe Flacco is that we've seen running backs be very successful with Joe Flacco. Last year, Jonathan Taylor had a strong stretch of the year. I mean, he had 600 yards in the last 4 games of the year. This year, saw Quinshon Judkins come in, and, he's been elevated to this RB2-ish type value. I'm not saying I think Chase Brown goes back to the, back-end RB1 value that he was drafted, but I do think this can help the offense move better, which in turn can lead to more value for Chase Brown. So I'm not sure I would call him a buy low. I just think it's a hold the panic. Let's see what this offense looks like under Flacco. I don't know if they get Flacco to start this week, but if they do, or even if it's next week, I expect Chase Brown to be much better than he has over the first 5 games. There's no way, honestly, there's no way it can be worse, right? But we've seen, like I said, we saw Judkins look good, and I think the one thing with Flacco is that he will check down if needed, but as long as they're moving the offense, they can get to the red zone. I think Chase Brown should be better RB2 the rest of the way with Joe Flacco. Sleeper point here. We've had Gesicki, we've had Noah Fant. The one thing about Joe Flacco is that he makes his tight ends elite, right? We saw what he did with David Njoku and Harold Fannin. The problem is I think they're more sleeper, right? We're not seeing Gesicki play a ton of snaps. We're not seeing Noah Fant play a ton of snaps. So neither of these guys is truly rostered in fantasy, but they are sleepers in deeper leagues and players to take note of, because if we get anything close to what Harold Fannin, David Njoku were doing, one of these guys should emerge. Noah Fant, a bigger body, got Mike Gesicki, kind of a receiver at tight end. I don't know that either of them becomes truly fantasy viable, but sleepers at tight end, there could be one of these guys that emerges in Noah Fant, a player who we've seen be fantasy viable in the past. The Bengals signing this offseason does have potential here, along with Mike Gesicki. So a whole lot of fallout here with Joe Flacco, this Bengals offense, and just stability. I think that's the big thing here, because in the first half of the game this weekend, it looked like another lost effort for the Bengals, and they were able to put things together fantasy-wise in the second half that made us rethink things. With Flacco, hopefully we're able to get quarter to quarter, game to game. We're able to get a little bit more stability, but Flacco's got to be a lot better than he was to start the year. What are your guys' thoughts on this Joe Flacco trade to the Bengals? A big trade, I think, not just for real football, but for fantasy, as far as some of our superstars that we've been relying on. A couple of the comments came in here. We do not miss that guy, Wacko Flacco, down here in Baltimore, but we do miss winning. It's been tough for the Baltimore Ravens, but I do think the Bengals have the offensive pieces. I don't think they want to give up on this season, and it kind of feels like it's going to be a lost season. So, I know Baltimore fans miss winning. I know Cincinnati fans are missing winning right now. I think that's the answer here and the reason why Joe Flacco's in place. It's to try to get some wins here, to try to get some momentum, because the Bengals have a crazy schedule coming up, playing a lot of top teams. So for me, I think that this is one of those situations where Flacco brings a veteran presence, something they don't have to worry about. I kind of think Jake Browning, we saw the best of him in 2023. The one key here is, does Flacco start? And I saw that one come in the chat as well, is, do we think that Joe Flacco starts? If you're the Bengals, you don't make this trade to have Joe Flacco on the bench, right? I think you give Jake Browning, if you want to get Joe Flacco up to speed on the offense, you give Jake Browning another week, see what he looks like. But in all honesty, you make this deal because you need a different starter. So I think Joe Flacco will be the starter, whether it's this week or next week. And for Jake Browning's value, I maybe he has one more week, maybe. But I think you make this move because you need a new preemptive starter. Another trade that just came in the chat that I really liked here, just traded Pearsall for Chase Brown. I like this move, but I think you sold a little too low on Pearsall unless you were just avoiding injury. Now, I get buying Chase Brown at value. I get it. Like, I think that there is some value to be had here. So I'm glad you asked it. But I think that Ricky Pearsall has much more value than Chase Brown does. You see Kendrick Bourne in, you see, Jawan Jennings will be back at some point, and we know Ricky Pearsall's hurt, Brock Purdy's hurt. But that's not necessarily the type of trade that I would make for Chase Brown. I would try to trade for him at market value, not where you think the value should be. If you think he's a high-end running back two or maybe a back-end RB1, you don't need to trade for him as that. You should be trying to trade for him at value and taking advantage of other people panicking. That's the way I would trade for Chase Brown. So while I like being active and maybe trying to buy low on a running back because it is kind of tough to find some good running backs right now, I don't think that I would have traded Pearsall for Chase Brown. Hopefully it works out for you and Chase Brown's elite, but those aren't the kind of deals I would move. I would try to trade for him at a little bit lesser value, or the other option there is if you like the value, try to get an additional piece there with upside in the deal. Last one from the chat here, it says, we need Flacco to start the game for Pittsburgh to complete. Start a game for Pittsburgh to complete the cycle. Already started for Baltimore. Already started for Cleveland. About to start for Cincinnati. Imagine he goes to Pittsburgh and plays for the entire AFC North. That would be crazy. That would be crazy. I mean, to be honest, Joe Flacco still playing football starting right now is already insane enough. So to me, that's an interesting fact that he's played for three teams in the AFC North already. What are you guys' thoughts? Do you think that Joe Flacco will make Chase Brown lead? Do you think that he'll provide value for Jamar Chase and T. Higgins? Because the one player, like I said, that I'm really in on is like T. Higgins. I feel like T. Higgins, y'all agree with me there? I feel like T. Higgins can be good. I got Genty for Chase Brown. You know what? Genty for Chase Brown, that's elite right there. And Genty, who had a bad game this week, I think down the stretch is going to be amazing. So good job there. You replaced a high-end RB2 with a back-end RB1. That's how I feel about it when it comes to Genty. All right, we're going to move on, guys. Let's move on to the waiver wire now. I know that's why you guys are here to talk about waivers for Week 6 and Week 5. Week five provided some pickups, a mega game, but really not a whole lot inspiring-wise that just changes the trajectory of fantasy. I do think there's some big names here and even a couple sleeper names that maybe not everybody's covering that can help you. And, a lot of teams right now are, they're 1-4 or 2-3 or 0-5. This is the time where we have more teams with losing records than teams with winning records, right? So I think it feels like that at least, right? Everybody feels those losing teams. It feels like, I'm losing right now, man. 2-3, it's the end of the world. And then the other teams with a winning record are feeling like, okay, we good. I think if you have a losing record, it's not time to panic yet. And if you have a winning record, it's time to start taking advantage of bye week preparation. I think with waivers, we can do that. But also, I think being strategic in how you approach the look aheads is very important. So whether you have a winning record or a losing record, don't trip. Don't trip. We have plenty of time. Even those 0-5 teams, I've seen teams come from behind and make the fantasy playoffs. But let's get into a couple names that can help those losing teams, maybe kind of stabilize some of those winning teams a little bit more. And the first name we have to talk about, we got to talk about it, Rico Dowdle. I mean, an amazing performance versus the Dolphins. We saw him 23 carries, 206 yards, and a touchdown. And this is a player who was slept on majorly by the fantasy community. And obviously with Chuba Hubbard going down, it opened up the doors to show what Rico Dowdle can really do. And the problem here is that Chuba Hubbard at some point is going to come back. But to see what Rico Dowdle did last week, it lets you know the talent is still there. And there's a reason he finished with 1,000 yards last year in Dallas. So the good thing about Rico Dowdle is that the offense, it's been kind of RB friendly. We've seen Chuba Hubbard be a top 15 to 20-ish back at times, sometimes even top 12-ish type back. But this offense is very running back friendly, and we don't know when Chuba Hubbard is coming back. There's a real possibility that he misses this week, especially with the way that Rico Dowdle played. Plus, if you look down there on the screen, there is a revenge game on deck in Week 6. We're talking about the Dallas Cowboys, Rico Dowdle's former team, who let him walk in free agency. You don't think Rico Dowdle has that game starred? No pun intended, right? So I think this is a chance if you want to pick up a short-term running back option. I think Rico Dowdle provides a little bit of upside, especially next week. The one caveat I will say here is that Chuba Hubbard is expected to come back at some point. So when Chuba Hubbard comes back, is this a split? Is Rico Dowdle going back to being a backup? I think there's a 0% chance after what he did last week that we see Rico Dowdle be a backup. And Dave Canales even came out and said, I don't think there's any way we can not have Rico Dowdle on the field more even when Chuba's back. So expect this thing to be a split. If I had Chuba Hubbard, I'd be slightly concerned that Rico Dowdle does take some touches. And if I had Rico Dowdle, I would be excited about next week, but also temper expectations once Chuba Hubbard comes back. Don't blow all your fab on Rico Dowdle, but if you do need a short-term fix, Rico Dowdle is a player I would pick up. The next player I want to talk about is Mason Taylor. Now, Mason Taylor, a tight end, is not the tight end that we all thought was going to be the pickup talk of the week. Theo Johnson had 2 touchdowns. A.J. Barner had 2 touchdowns. But from what I saw to Mason Taylor, this looks like it could be the wide receiver 2 in this offense, even at tight end. Over the last 3 weeks, we see Mason Taylor have 6, 7, and 12 targets, over 8 targets a game over the last 3 games. And you talk about 9 receptions for 67 yards. Those numbers don't really stand out, on the box sheet, but that's 15 fantasy points at tight end without a touchdown. Now, Mason Taylor is a second-round pick out of LSU, big body frame. And, we got some of the other talks here about, other tight ends here, rookie tight ends, Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland, and Mason Taylor, for fantasy purposes, is kind of fallen under the radar. So I think Mason Taylor could be one of those guys that profiles as a high-end tight end 2, or maybe even back-end tight end 1 during bye weeks here, especially if he can continue to see the volume he's seeing. Justin Fields is back and completely trust him, and there's no real threat to take targets away. You have Garrett Wilson, you have Breece Hall, and then you have Mason Taylor, who's earning more of a role. As you can see here, he was the highest rated offensive player of the week for the Jets, which, and we saw Justin Fields in the second half. Like that says a lot, being a rookie as well. Mason Taylor is a name that not everybody's going to pick up, especially if you just lost Brenton Strange and you were counting on him at tight end, or maybe you've had George Kittle and been struggling to keep up with, getting a viable tight end. You've had Mark Andrews, who's kind of done you dirty a little bit, or maybe you're relying on Harold Fannin and he didn't pan out. Mason Taylor could be an option for you here. So out of the tight end pickups, A.J. Barner, Theo Johnson, and Mason Taylor, he didn't have the highest score out of all 3 of them, but that is the player I would pick up. Mason Taylor, I think he is a great pickup this week at the tight end position. Let's get into some more chat questions before I get back into more of the waiver wire pickups of the week. One of the questions that came in was, would you drop either Juwan Johnson or Zach Ertz for Mason Taylor? And with Taysom Hill back, it could be like a little bit of a slide for Juwan Johnson. Taysom Hill does more things than Juwan Johnson does, and different types of things, right? So I think Juwan Johnson is a good player to have. Zach Ertz kind of feels, after 0 especially, feels hard to trust. So I think if I had to drop one, I would drop Zach Ertz. Juwan Johnson still has trade value, and he still has upside. So I think I'd rather have Mason Taylor than Zach Ertz. Another chat that came in and said, this is good news, probably talking about the Flacco news. Shedeur Sanders is now a stepping stone away from starting a game. Who knows why Shedeur Sanders is not starting right now? Dylan Gabriel did play decent. But yes, now that Shedeur should be the number 2 quarterback, we're not sure about that, right? Like sometimes they play games with us. But Flacco now out of the picture. Shedeur, it would be in line to start if something were to happen to Dylan Gabriel or the team decides to move on. Rico Dowdle is hurt. What are you trying to do, son? Sabotage the league? Rico Dowdle did come back and finish the game. I haven't seen anything about him being out this week. So if that's something new, let me know. But for now, I think Rico Dowdle should be available this weekend. If he's not, then make other options. Another reason not to blow fab, it would be a 1-week solution. So if it does come out that he's hurt and not available for this week for some reason, then yes, you're right. But all indications are that Rico Dowdle is expected to play this week, and that Chuba Hubbard might be the one that's out. So check again. You might want to check that again, my man, unless something came out today that I'm not aware of. Got Chase Brown for Michael Carter. I think that's a very solid move. So we had the Ricky Pearsall for Chase Brown trade earlier. I wasn't a fan of that one as much. Michael Carter for Chase Brown is the right type of move. You trade somebody that is hot right now for an asset that's kind of been falling. Who knows if Chase Brown comes back to his normal value or even slightly below that with Joe Flacco? We don't know. But what I do know one thing, Michael Carter is probably not going to sustain this value over the course of the long term. Trey Benson may be back at some point this year. And it's probably going to be a ugly backfield in Arizona. So I love this deal for you. Getting Michael Carter or getting Chase Brown for Michael Carter, that's a dub. That's a dub. Let's move on to more of the waiver wire picks here. And obviously with the waiver wire picks, they can't all be smashes, right? But you do want to be able to find upside. You do want to be able to have short-term solutions, especially for those with players on a bye this week. There's 2 teams on bye this week. And for the Dallas Cowboys, we saw Ryan Flournoy had an incredible game. 112 yards, 6 catches, 9 targets. Now, everybody expected Jalen Tolbert to be the guy, and he flopped, right? Like with CeeDee Lamb out, it's who's next in line. We know George Pickens is the alpha. We know Jake Ferguson has taken an elevated role. But Ryan Flournoy now is one of those options where we're saying, okay, is he going to be a viable solution? He proved to be that. He was 0% rostered heading into the week. And I don't think that this is a long-term fix. I don't think that this is it. Once CeeDee Lamb comes back, Flournoy's probably going to be on waivers. But I do think this is a player that has some spike week potential in your 12, 14, 16 team leagues and should be rostered as a flex in those leagues. Now, I will say this. He's going to be volatile, very boom or bust. He could have a game like this, or he could have a game where he only has 2 catches for 20 yards. That's some of the risks that you've been taking this season specifically with your flex, right? There's been those boom or bust type players. But with 9 targets in this Dallas offense and the way that Dak is playing right now, this isn't a player I'd want to leave out there for anybody else to pick up and start against me. So for now, I would say pick him up, make sure he's not out there. You can hold off on starting him unless you're desperate. That's how I play with Ryan Flournoy, all right? So for me, I'm good with picking him up. He's not a must start at this option right now. Next up, we had an injury. We had a major injury. Amarion Hampton. For those who had Hampton, I know there was a world of happiness once Najee went out. You got a full-time player, a guy that was a rookie, very hyped. And now we've seen him head to IR with an ankle injury, out at least for 4 weeks. The Chargers have a later bye. We might see him out through that time period. That leaves us with some mediocre options here, but we got to talk about them. The first one is Kamani Vidal. And I'm just going to kind of pair him and Hassan Haskins together. I think Kamani Vidal, we've seen him in this spot before. Last season, he had opportunity when J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards went out. It was less than inspiring. But there could be, for 4 weeks, there could be one of these backs that does have fantasy value. And for those desperate at running back right now, say you missed out on Michael Carter, you missed out on Kendre Miller, and you're looking for like some hope off the bench at running back if you've been starting some of these lesser options, or maybe you're going to be going through buys here. Kamani Vidal is the one I would want to roster just because I think the upside is a little bit higher than Hassan Haskins. Now, like I said, it's not inspiring at all. He had opportunity in the last game, didn't do much with it. Same thing for Haskins, had opportunity once Hampton went out, didn't do much with it. But I think if I was going to take a chance on one of these guys, Kamani Vidal does offer a little of the passing game. It does seem to have a little bit more versatility to him, whereas Hassan Haskins is the bigger back, kind of more about the player who probably is going to score more touchdowns. So I know a lot of you probably heard in the fantasy streets last year, heard Kamani Vidal, go pick him up. He's a sleeper. And I wasn't a big fan of him last year, not really a big fan of him this year either. But if you don't want to spend on Rico Dowdle, or maybe you have zero fab, or you're looking for very short-term options here, we did this last week with Michael Carter and Amari DiMercato, and Michael Carter proved a little bit fantasy valuable. Amari DiMercato was a flip away from being fantasy viable as well. So you just don't want to leave these guys out here just in case Kamani Vidal has improved over this offseason or offers a little bit here over the next 4+ weeks while Amarion Hampton is out. Hassan Haskins, same thing. One of these two should do something in theory. There's no chance that no chance that we can guarantee that they do. So Haskins more the touchdown play. Vidal's more of the versatile play. All right, before we get into the last two here really quickly, we're going to go over a couple more chat questions, and then I'll get into my last two. One of the things that I did want to mention before we get into the chat here is that there are some other interesting names here that I haven't gone over, that I will not be going over. Some of them that probably are already rostered. Michael Carter, just make sure he's not available out there. Kendrick Bourne, who had a big game, make sure he's not available out there. So you want to make sure, like, even I think those are names Prabhat probably talked about last week. Heading into this week, just make sure those guys aren't available. I'm not going to cover them here in the last two. I think Hassan Haskins, just to piggyback on Hassan Haskins really quickly. This is a bigger back, and I could see this being a split, an ugly split for both of these backs. And it also wouldn't shock me. The reason why I say don't use like a heavy fab, it wouldn't shock me if the Chargers go out and get a running back, especially just because they need production at that position. They dealt with this exact same thing last year. And I don't think that Kamani Vidal and Hassan Haskins are both good enough to keep the Chargers' run game afloat where they need to, especially with all the injuries on their offensive line. So just know you're picking up these guys. This is more of a just in case they hit type of thing instead of it being a lock, somebody you want to put in as your RB2 or your RB3 for now. All right. Let's get back into the waiver wire picks, guys. We have two more. Make sure you guys throw some chat questions in there. I'll be answering them through the rest of the show. And if you have any lineup-specific questions, pickup-specific questions, or trade questions, happy to answer them on YouTube or the BR app. At tight end, I already talked about Mason Taylor, but let's also talk about A.J. Barner. Now, I said I would like Mason Taylor over Barner, but A.J. Barner has been good to start this year. Now, it hasn't equated to like top 10 tight end, but he's been a top 20 tight end. He's been a top 10 tight end in 3 of the first 5 weeks of the season. He had 7 targets last week, 7 receptions and 53 yards, 2 touchdown catches. And he's also been playing on the field a lot. He's been, over 80% of the snaps on 4 of the 5 games. So with this offense, when Cooper Kupp came, it was like, okay, maybe Kupp is going to play the slot, and they're going to be a run-heavy offense with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, and it's not been the case. We've seen heavy volume out of JSN. We've seen Torrey Horton get involved, and now we're seeing A.J. Barner get involved as well. The problem is he hadn't seen a whole lot of volume coming into last week, but this is a good football player, and if they can get things rolling with him, this is one of those tight ends that you want to have on your bench in case of buys, in case of injuries. That would be top of the list as opposed to some of the other names that are out there. I don't know how reliable he'll be, but I do want to mention, like I said, he's been a top 10 tight end in 3 out of the 5 weeks. So kind of a boomer bust tight end 2 option. I would pick him up just to see what happens in case the Seattle offense continues to have things clicking and decides to move things around so teams can't focus all their efforts on JSN. The last player I want to talk about here before we get into the final questions here, Tyjae Spears. I know. He didn't do nothing, right? Last week, he just came off of the high ankle himself. Only played in 17% of the snaps. But for those who miss out on Michael Carter, for those who miss out on Hassan Haskins, for those who miss out on Kamani Vidal and Kendre Miller and some of these other backup options, and you're looking in your deeper leagues, I do think Tyjae Spears has a path here to fantasy relevance. We saw towards the end of last year, he had top 5 fantasy finishes during the fantasy playoffs. And Tony Pollard, I know he got in the end zone last week, but, Brian Callahan has come out and said, hey, look, we want to get our running back involved. We want Tyjae Spears to get more involved. And he said that before in the past, especially last year a lot, but Tyjae Spears proved himself last year. He proved himself towards the second half that he deserved a bigger role. And that expectation was expected coming into this season. So not a lot of fantasy production last week. My thought is that some people who waited the 4 weeks are going to say, I'm done with Tyjae Spears. I'm going to let him go. And with running back being kind of thin this year, especially in the back end, I want to make sure I had an option, and Tyjae Spears would probably get another 2-3 weeks of grace from me. And before I decided to drop him, especially because, we're considering starting Michael Carter right now, right? If you had, Trey Benson and you're looking for an option, you weren't able to pick up some of these backups. Tyjae Spears could be a reliable option here sooner than we think. And in fantasy, a lot of times you need to play a week ahead instead of a week behind. And I think, like I said, there's going to be more than enough people who drop Tyjae Spears trying to look for the next pickup, looking for Rico Dowdle this week, looking for Kamani Vidal or Hassan Haskins. Tyjae Spears belongs on rosters over at least Vidal and Haskins and long-term, probably over Rico Dowdle as well. So I know it's a tough name to trust after last week, but he's definitely a name that I would want to pick up. So those are the waiver wire pickups for week 6. I didn't talk about Theo Johnson as well. If you'd like to pick up Theo Johnson, especially with Malik out, it was good to see him get 6 catches. Only 33 yards isn't inspiring. It looked a little touchdown dependent. With Jackson Dart, we're probably going to see a little up and down. But these are the waiver wire pickups. Let me know your guys' thoughts or if you have any other players that you would like to go over. Kenji asked me, who do you have as Rookie of the Year a quarter into the season? I think Offensive Rookie of the Year for sure. It has to be Emeka Egbuka. Like the way he's playing Fantasy Rookie of the Year, I mean, he's playing at such an incredible level right now that I don't know if I could see anybody else outplaying him this year at that spot. So for me, it's going to be Emeka Egbuka. I did not have him high enough in my rankings coming into the year. I'm not sure anybody did. He's been playing at a top 5 receiver level, which is insane. Also in the chat said, Michael Carter went off last week. And yes, that's true. But to depend on Michael Carter all the time, it's not something we want to do as fantasy managers, right? Like Michael Carter is not the kind of player that's going to deliver RB1 performances week in and week out. I'm sure he's going to have some duds. It's just one of the things you have to keep in mind after strong performances, things typically balance out. I don't think we see Michael Carter top 12 running back the entire time while Trey Benson's on IR. The team, the Cardinals, didn't even see it that way. You had James Conner ahead of him. You had Trey Benson ahead of him. He was splitting work with DeMarcado. So for me, I hear you on Michael Carter had a strong performance, but he's not somebody I would want to continue to rely on. Jeffrey said, I have Tajay Spears. Should I hold him or drop for Algier or Tootin? Also, out of Algier or Tootin, who do you like better? I have one spot. So I think Algier probably is the best bet right now, seeing as he's seeing a lot of volume even with Bijan Robinson, right? Bashal Tootin is good, but he's shown that he can't be reliable. He's had some strong performances, some weak performances, right? But Travis Etienne is the guy. Bijan is also the guy, but they're using him so much at receiver and in the receiving game that they found, 15-plus carries for Algier at times, and it looks like he could play that role. Plus, if something were to happen to Bijan, now we get Tyler Algier in a much better role. I think I'd rather have Algier. The only thing with Tajay Spears is that where a Tony Pollard either change and roll, benching, the season got away from the Titans, where that kind of move away from Tajay Spears being fantasy viable. I see your plan. Picking players going up against losing teams. It's a good plan. You know what? I try to pick players that can help me win my fantasy matchup, and that's what I did this week in talking about these waiver wire pickups. I'm trying to just help you guys win your league. That's the entire goal. So, yes, against losing teams works, but also players that help us win our matchups. That's what we got to do. Last one I'll get into before we wrap up here. Should I drop Travis Hunter for Kendre Miller? And I know at some point Kendre Miller is going to be fantasy viable if A, they decide to trade Alvin Kamara, or B, the season gets out of hand for the Saints and the Saints say, hey, what do we have with Kendre Miller? The problem is we don't know if that's going to happen or when that is going to happen. So I think when it comes to Kendre Miller, that's one of the players that I think has some upside later in the year, but I wouldn't quite bank on, unfortunately. That's the way I play it with Kendre Miller, all right? So let's go back over all the waiver wire pickups of the week, starting off with Carolina Panthers running back Rico Dowdle in a revenge game against Dallas. We got Mason Taylor, tight end for the Jets. Ryan Florney. We also have Kamani Vidal or Hassan Haskins, your choice. A.J. Barner. And Tajay Spears is kind of a dart throw here over the next couple weeks for our waiver wire pickups for week 6. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we've played 5 weeks into the year. It's good to kind of recap things, see where they are, but also do not panic. Unless you're on 5, it's time to get some wins. Also, be prepared for your buys. They are more important right now than trying to look ahead for the playoffs. Look ahead when your bye weeks, make the right pickups. And for myself, Justin Henry, my co-host, Prabhat Parmar, we'll see you on the next one. Peace out, everybody, and good luck in your week 6 matchups.